My name is Debbie Bruno. I grew up in the Hudson Valley, and I was mostly sort of a person who identified as being Italian because the Italian culture is so strong. And so I knew a lot about my immigrant Italian grandfather, and I didn't know that much about my Dutch ancestors. So my ancestors had been in New Netherlands in the 1600s, and I thought that was very cool. I thought maybe we would be related to Martin Van Buren, or I could join the Daughters of the American Revolution. But what I didn't sort of think about was what else that might mean. And so I was talking to a friend, historian friend, and she said, Dutch ancestors, oh, they were probably enslavers. And so that stopped me cold. I immediately went into denial. No, 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 we were not rich. We were farmers. And so I resisted that question right from the start. I mean, she said, just look. So that's what I did. I fell down that rabbit hole of research.
My name is Eleanor Mire. I grew up in Malden, Massachusetts. 2 or 3 generations lived in Malden, Massachusetts, went to Malden schools. And when I was growing up, my grandmother, who was the matriarch of our family, my mother's mother, always had said there were no slaves in our family. Her mother was Ella Vanderzee. And the stories she told us were probably stories she had heard from her mother, but her mother did pass away when she was 7 years old. So, but she was very proud of the Vanderzee family, but we didn't really know much more than what she had told us. I really had thought I was at a dead end that had lasted 10 years on information because it's information that would have had been gleaned in New Baltimore, in Coxsackie, that I didn't have the ability to go out and do or didn't know how, but Debra did. We found things that I could not imagine ever having found, like the manumission papers and things. It's mind-boggling to me that we were able to come together and get the information that I would never in my lifetime would have thought to see.
One of the things I think that's really interesting that we learned in the course of our research is that even though enslavement didn't have the same large numbers as slavery in the South, one of the interesting things was that in some ways it was less free because the enslaved people lived within the houses of their enslavers. They had almost no moment where they could take a breath, where they could say, okay, my day is done. I can take a breath. I can talk to my family. They were in the cellars and the attics of the home. So that was really, in some ways, more cruel in a lot of ways because there was no break in the day for them. So that was one thing that really was remarkable. But, we also learned some incredible stories of people who ran off and what they had to go through when they ran off. And you can learn that in the runaway slave advertisements. So there were nuances like that. One of our favorite stories is sort of learning about the life of Thomas Vanderzee and who he was and how respected he was. So we had a lot of fun kind of digging through those manuscripts and those newspaper articles. And in fact, what we often joke about is that we feed off each other's energy. Every once in a while, one of us will get a little tired and we'll get a little discouraged and we'll take a break. And then the other one will come in and say, I found this article. I found this piece of information. And then it gives us more inspiration to keep going, which has been a lot of fun.
When we first connected, she was more apprehensive than I was because she didn't know how I would take talking to her, a descendant of somebody who enslaved people. But my attitude is she didn't enslave people. The people today didn't enslave people. But she acknowledged the fact that it had happened. And you run into a lot of people who do not want to acknowledge that fact. It's an odd thing where I feel guilt is almost like an indulgence. I can feel guilty and say I feel guilty and not do anything about it. It's when you do something about it, as in acknowledging it out loud, not just to yourself, but you have to acknowledge it out loud. And I think one of the problems we have is people isn't the acknowledgement. We still haven't had enough people acknowledging how bad it really was. And I tell Debra, I don't discuss reparations because we have to get through the acknowledgement phase, because you will never have people who will even want to discuss the topic of reparation until you have enough people who have not acknowledged what happened and how bad it was and how it still affects us every day.
I think now every time I look at an older house, I don't think, oh, look at that gorgeous older house with that beautiful stonework or that beautiful brickwork. I think, oh, where did the enslaved people live? This house is old enough. Enslaved people lived there. So I now picture them. And I've been able to go into a number of those homes and especially go into the cellars and really feel as if I had this sense of a presence of people who had lived there and what they had gone through. So that's one thing, but also just the overlay of history. I think what we're doing in our country now is actually doing a lot more in terms of the depth of history and stories that haven't been told. And this is just one very small piece of a very large picture of stories that have been whitewashed, have been sort of glossed over in a number of ways. And so I wonder now, whenever I look at a piece of land, what had happened there before? Whereas maybe I hadn't really thought about that in great depth before. So now I do.
I am a great-grandchild of enslaved people, but my mother was a grandchild of enslaved people. So it wasn't like it was so long ago. And the effects of it are still felt by us. And so, some people think, oh, that was a long time ago. It doesn't really count, doesn't really matter. And why don't you people get over it? We look at these problems in other countries or the histories of other countries, and we look at them in depth, but we don't want to look at the feeling in depth of what went on in our own country. And I think people have to start focusing, bring it home and see there are good things that come out of it, there are bad things, but acknowledge it, that it happened here too.